Good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads, episode 59. Today is Friday, May 28th of 2021. Today we're doing COVID Connect, COVID news, and then after that, our judges are with us today, our pitch party judges. Today we're going to be talking about startup turnoffs, things that you don't like to see when the pitch comes and when the startup comes. And we'll be talking all about that in a bit. Thank you all for your thoughts and prayers. Many of you know that our youngest was born about 3 weeks ago. We have been in and out of the hospital. I appreciate the patience of our crew today that's going to be talking with us for the very little preparation time we were able to give them, as well as all of the things that haven't been followed up on while we've been in and out of the hospital. Just pulled an all-nighter the other night there. So your thoughts and your prayers are greatly appreciated. In the world of COVID news, I want to take you first to this news item with from the CDC. I'm going to do a screen share right here to this note about myocarditis and pericarditis from CDC. You've been hearing about this in the news. They're still saying it's a very rare thing, but there have been increased reports to VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, of cases of inflammation of the heart called myocarditis and pericarditis happening after the mRNA vaccines. Very rare, given the number of doses administered, but they are tracking them. And apparently it appears to resolve quickly. And here's the cases have been reported mostly in male adolescents and young adults, 16 years and older, more often after getting the second dose of one of these two COVID vaccines than after the first dose. Of course, we know that usually the second dose hits harder and typically within several days after the vaccination. So something to be watching for, it's inflammation of the heart muscle. And they say, yes, you should still be getting vaccinated for everyone 12 years of age and older. The symptoms here to be on the lookout for would be chest pain, shortness of breath, and feelings of having a fast beating, fluttering, or pounding heart. This is not medical advice, but this is what the CDC says here. So obviously worth knowing about. I want to take you next to the COVID news, and we're going to do that today a little bit differently than we have in the past. Oftentimes we will select particular slides out of the following document, but I want to go a little bit more in depth today and show you where these pictures come from. You remember way back in the day when the folks at covidtracking.org found themselves shutting down covidtracking.org because they said that CDC was finally doing the job that they'd hoped they would have done from the start. This is one of the state profile reports. This from this week for the state of Michigan. These are available for all the states. And on the front page, we get a synopsis. The good news here is Michigan's synopsis is heading in a green direction. The community transmission level that we've cited before is in the substantial transmission category. It's down a little bit from the last 6 weeks, but we'll talk about that again in just a second. They have so much data in these reports, it's not even funny. If you have any question about how COVID has been progressing through the population, this would be a great place to come to look. Here's a graphic you'll remember from previous weeks. The new cases versus testing. The new cases is now down below or at or below the numbers that we saw last winter. It's really great. Testing positivity rate down well below 10%. This graphic, which we've been tracking, sure looking good at the moment. It was the 40 through 69-year-olds who really carried this latest round of hospitalizations as opposed to the older age group. And even that is coming down now, so we're thankful to see that. But here's that persistent transmission graphic that we have talked about for the last 2 months, and it's only now beginning to abate. And the question will come in months and years to come. Was this a success of our interventions or what's going on here, folks? Because the transmission is still, for probably the 8th week in a row, massive in the state of Michigan. It's at the highest level. Down below, we have by county, which we won't belabor here, but you should know that that's there if you wanted to see how that's played out, as well as PCR results, hospital admission and death rates by county. And here to the national picture of vaccinations. Michigan ranks 25th in the nation, right in the middle. In terms of people fully vaccinated, you see that this range goes all the way from sort of 0 to 19, all the way up to 50% or more by county. We can break this down by demographic. You haven't seen this in previous weeks, but that information is all in the document. In terms of the national picture for vaccinations, 281 million doses administered, 127 million people fully vaccinated. That's 38.5% of the total population. And the vaccine doses administered has been dropping in almost that straight line that we saw. New York Times had been saying they thought the era of mass vaccinations was over. It sure does appear that that is dropping down now that people who want it have gotten it, and that is starting to peter downwards, but by no means a small number, still 1.5 million daily doses being administered, which was a pretty important milestone on the way up. So good to see that. Race and ethnicity, age, we won't belabor the data. I just want you to know that it's in here. This is the kind of stuff that CDC is tracking, has been tracking. All this data is available from the state profile reports on the CDC website. PCR test positivity, obviously many parts of the country not really doing much testing anymore, and where they are mostly green. Hospital admissions, this is a graphic you'll be familiar with. Sadly, Michigan's still dead last in the country in terms of hospital admissions for probably the 7th or 8th week in a row. But most of the country doing pretty well at this point. COVID admissions per 100 beds. Green means really 0 to 3 admissions per 100 beds. And you're now hearing many stories of hospitals without any COVID cases in them. Deaths, this is a wonderful picture to be seeing that coming down dramatically. If you look at the bottom right there, 3 months before, there was a lot of red in this country. And so we're very thankful for the picture above, which is dropping off dramatically. No comfort to those who are still suffering with the disease. Here's that community transmission graphic. The middle of the country doing pretty well in terms of transmission. Everywhere else, quite high transmission, especially Michigan, which is really interesting. We're not quite sure what's going on there. And that's about the end of the state profile report. We haven't gone through this before. I just wanted you to know that it's there. Take a look if you're interested in the data, because CDC really has been putting out a very consistent now for weeks and weeks and weeks set of documentation that you can get into the details on if you'd like to. We'll bring up one more share here, and that is the news from FDA about a particular, oops, that's not quite how we wanted to share it, but there you go. Let's try that. Hopefully that is sharing. Maybe Steve can confirm if we've got the right window sharing.
Yep, we're good.
Thank you so much. We are looking at CDRH, Center for Devices and Radiological Health, with this very blunt subject line: stop using the LIPU Medical Technology SARS-CoV-2 antigen and lecurate antibody tests. The FDA has identified this issue as a Class 1 recall, the most serious type. The FDA is aware that these unauthorized tests were distributed to pharmacies to be sold for at-home testing by consumers, as well as offered for sale directly to consumers. And so here's another example of a place where FDA has been doing the follow-up on these kinds of antibody and antigen tests. And in this case, making a Class 1 recall, get these things off the market. So if you are aware of any of these, or you ever saw that name come across, this would be worth knowing. A little bit more news from the community. Into Being continues to seek an embedded systems developer. Reach out. You can reach info@intobeing.com. If you're into microcontroller firmware and user interface software development and system design, if you like regulatory science and electromechanical systems, that'd be a bonus. Also, get all of our FDA education segments on the website at intobeing.com. Under the webinars tab, you can find all the segments that we've done over this last year and a half. And what will be the last time now, by June 1st, they need to hear from you, Mark and Tino. Would love to hear from you. If you want to go to Medical Design and Manufacturing West in Anaheim, California, with the wonderful folks at MEDC. Reach out to these folks. They are looking for medical device companies in optical instrument and lens manufacturing, electromedical and electrotherapeutic apparatus manufacturing, analytical laboratory instrument manufacturing, surgical and medical instrument manufacturing, surgical appliance and supplies manufacturing, dental equipment and supplies manufacturing, and ophthalmic goods manufacturing. They want to show off the state, and if you're in one of those disciplines, they want to show you off. So reach out and talk to Tino and Mark. And with that, we're going to come to our main event today. This is the first event relating to our now quarterly pitch party. We're giving away $2,500 at the end of the month, at the end of June, that is, I should say. It's not quite June yet. And today we are having our judges on. But before that, let me just tell you about the pitch party. The pitch party is open to US-based MedTech startups eligible for consideration regardless of their stage. Each startup's going to get 10 minutes at the end of an upcoming show. And near the end of the quarter, our panel of community judges is going to come on to discuss the month's candidates, not to pick winners and losers. We've long since decided that you can't pick winners and losers in the pitch business, but you can say what you like and what you don't like. And at the end, our judges will tip their hat to one for the prize of $2,500. Pitch decks can be sent to pitchparty@medtechcrossroads.org to be eligible for selection. And Into Being will select 5 to 10 startups to participate. Presentations are limited to 10 minutes. Problem statement, vision, value proposition, the team, the milestones, the business model, competitors, and the ask, or the functionally equivalent areas. Woo, that just went by so fast. I want to tell you about them first and then welcome them back to the show, our pitch party judges. I'm going to go from right to left since I went from left to right last time. Stacey Frankovich is the program manager with MedHealth coming out of Techtown, Detroit. Jim Medsker, the president of Keystone Solutions Group, a soup to nuts turnkey product development and manufacturing house on the west side of the state. Dr. Niki Kennedy, a vascular surgeon and founder of Arbor Hive. And Andy Raeder, the managing partner at Evergreen M&A Partners. So we've got this wonderful lineup of judges. I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to welcome you all back to the show. If we could turn your audio and video back on. There's Andy, there's Jim, there's Niki and Stacey. Welcome back, guys.
Good to be here.
It's so good to see you all. I hope the spring has been treating you well. Has anybody had any major spring stories to share with us?
Probably not as good as Stacey's.
Stacey, are you willing to share us your story?
Oh, sure. Real quick, we bought ourselves a 15-foot round above ground pool this year. And as I told the judges earlier, my husband and I are empty nesters. We've downsized. We thought it would be fun to have this little pool in the backyard. We could have some cocktails. We could float through the summer. Tried to get ahead of the curve and set our appointment to have this thing installed and some landscaping done and some stairs built and it's not working out that way. We are in desperate need of a contractor. Our contractor has gone MIA on us a few times, and in my last text encounter with him, he actually asked, "Who is this?" So
That's a bad sign.
A pool contractor, if anybody happens to know one.
So there you go. We're expanding the pitch party. It's going to be MedTech startups and pool contractors because Stacey needs a new pool contractor.
Yes,
so
I do.
reach out. Since we put Stacey on the spot, Stacey, why don't you start us by telling us about you and your role at MedHealth, and maybe if there's anything interesting coming up in your organization's near-term future, tell us about it. We'd love to know more about it.
Sure. Thanks, Gene. So I am the program manager at MedHealth, and MedHealth is a cross-border collaboration between Southeast Michigan and Southwest Ontario. We work with the entrepreneurial community in the medtech space, trying to help them accelerate their technologies and their business ideas by creating connections, by providing educational opportunities and content, and by bringing parties together to collaborate and convene thought leadership. So we are very excited to be part of Pitch Party and part of Gene's webinar here. but we're really excited. We did host a virtual summit last year. We called it the MedHealth Matchmaking Mixer. And we're going to do virtual again this year. Unfortunately, we just weren't really sure what the fall was going to look like and how eager people would be to be back in confined spaces with large groups. So we're going virtual again this year. So save the date, October 21st. We'll have some great conversations and panels, but we'll also have the ability to have introductory conversations with health systems, with researchers, with private industry, with the funding environment. So lots of opportunity to connect with people, connect with your peers. We had individuals from 9 countries participate in our virtual model last year, and we are definitely hoping to break that record. So October 21st, save the date, and I'm sure I'll be on to announce it as we get closer and closer.
That's awesome, Stacey. And tell us the website name again so people can find that.
medhealthinnovation.org.
medhealthinnovation.org. Thank you. And thank you for being here. We're so glad you're one of our judges.
Thank you.
Let's go over next to Jim Medsker with Keystone Solutions Group. Jim, welcome back, and tell us just a bit about Keystone and anything you guys have going on or anything you want our audience to know.
Yeah, thank you, Gene. I'm glad to be back. So Jim Medsker, founder, president of Keystone Solutions Group. As Gene mentioned, we're a soup to nuts, or as we say, a turnkey product development and contract manufacturing resource in medical device. We produce quite a lot of a variety of class 1 and class 2 devices in imaging, the imaging arena, wound care, diagnostics, and others. And our biggest footprint is single-use disposable devices. However, we do have a growing presence in electromechanical products and devices as well. I would say that some cool new happenings at Keystone. We just finished the construction of our 4th Class 8 clean room. And I believe it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, a brand new, what we call a form fill seal machine was delivered. So it's a high-speed packaging machine. It's our 2nd one. And so we're gearing up for the next level of growth and being able to serve our clients with a wider range of production capabilities and capacities.
That's awesome. Thanks for being here, Jim. Let's go over to Dr. Niki Kennedy. Dr. Kennedy, it's good to see you.
Hey, Gene, how are you doing?
Doing well. What can you tell us about your goings on in Arbor Hive?
So Arbor Hive has been busy trying to collaborate with different accelerator groups, making sure that we're trying to connect doctors with innovators. And as always, we are looking to see if you've got a project or a company that could use some physician input. Please feel free to reach out to us at www.arborhive.com. We try to get something out to our docs every week with a new opportunity, and we'd love to include your opportunity on our list.
That's awesome. It's so cool to see physician innovators banding together and thinking about it that way, because it's a scary world out there when it comes to, okay, how am I going to get this idea out there? So love what you're doing. And Andy Raeder, managing partner at Evergreen M&A Partners. Andy, you have always struck me as one of those people who takes what's there and finds the gold in it. There's no, it's not, oh, we're going to tell you this perfect story and hope that it all happens. You're a guy who really understands how to go from where a company is into the value behind it, to find that value. Tell us about EMA and your business model and what's going on for you.
Thanks, Gene. That's it's nice of you to say. Yeah, every story has its strengths and its weaknesses, so it's worth kind of looking at both of them. And I guess we're going to talk about some of the soft spots today. It should be really interesting. But yeah, EMA, I'm one of the founding partners. We've been around 20 years, and we help small companies, usually almost always in life sciences, as they hit an inflection point. So we help them sort through their options, whether it's fundraising, partnerships, or collaborations, usually with larger strategic entities, investments from strategics, or outright sales to strategics. And so one of the things we like to think we do is help companies sort of on the journey. It's not always just kind of a one-step event. And Gene and I have had the chance to talk through a lot of companies that have come into being and other companies in the community. And for anyone that's out there, I want you to know that you don't need to make some giant commitment. I'm happy to talk to you about sort of where your company is, or your idea, your concept, your platform, your technology, and give you my my sense for again, it's sort of strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, that's great. Andy, thanks for being here. We appreciate each one of you being here and being our judges now over these past number of months, and we continue on with this quarterly format. You guys have always been so gracious. Every time we've had companies on, you have gently corrected places where it's like, that's just not quite there. You have been quick to point out strengths. Oftentimes I've been surprised by some of the things that you guys have discovered and been able to call out, and it's just been really fun to watch. Today we're giving a little bit of room. We're not going to be, none of us are going to be jerks about it. I may participate in it too, but we're giving ourselves a little bit of room to cut loose. We are not talking today about any specific startups. This is based on the aggregate experience of this group of people. We want to give ourselves a little bit more room to talk about some of the negatives, because I think we all know, as mentors and investors and doctors, you'll hear an idea and you'll kind of go, oh no, not again. I don't want to hear this again. And those things do start to form patterns. And of course, in the moment, you're gracious with the person who's there, and you try to focus on their strengths, and you try to gently correct away from their weaknesses, or face them up with it and say, this just isn't going to fly. But today we want to focus a little bit more on those weaknesses and see if we can call them out and find the trends. What are the things that when you hear about them, we called them the biggest turnoffs in the startup world. And we see them at different stages too. I tend to think, Niki's working with early stage innovators, just they can't even conceive that they could go and realize their idea. Stacey, you're reviewing lots of projects that are coming through, oftentimes looking for some of their first funding through TechTown and MedHealth. Jim's often seeing things that are, I would say, early stage to late stage, and they're coming and saying, we need you to make this thing for us. And Andy, I think you're seeing it all throughout the stages too. I got to imagine some of these lessons, they persist. Sometimes it's hard for a startup to let go of bad habits, perhaps. And maybe sometimes they're truly characteristic of the stage that they're at. And if they even make it to the later stage, they've necessarily lost out on it. But I'd asked you guys to come up with a list each, and I'm going to have you we'll go around the table and I'll ask you for one observation. What is one turnoff that you see when that startup comes to you and says, blah? What is that blah that gets you saying, oh no, not again?
I'll jump in.
Okay, Stacey's first. Stacey's the one, by the way, for the audience that said we had asked for a list of 3 and she came up with 10. So Stacey's going to be on top of this today.
Well, let me preface too, when you say, who we see, my background was with very early stage companies. I also, am a adjunct faculty member at OU. So I also see student ideas. So bear with me here, but I cannot stand it when they come in and say, I have no competitors. There's nobody doing what I'm doing. It makes me crazy. I've told students before, I'm inclined to throw something at you and tell you to leave. Because even the status quo, what are they doing right now? I don't care if it's duct tape or Excel spreadsheets or whatever. What are they doing right now? Because that status quo sometimes, boy, trying to cut into that can be the hardest competitor.
Jeff Reinveldt's out there in digital land nodding his head really strongly. He had actually just typed in something very similar. So yeah, I totally agree. And it's interesting what you say, Stacey, because we see that especially in med device practitioners, and maybe Dr. Kennedy will have more to say about this. They will literally do something, and it might be gauze and medical tape, but it's getting done. And the question is, can you actually, number one, change the behavior? Number two, can you penetrate the market? Is there even a way to realize that? That's a really powerful question. So the competitors aren't just the other company that's out there selling the thing that you're thinking of selling. It can also be entrenched practices, from what I hear you saying.
Yeah, you see it with software a lot because people are really, really tied to their Excel spreadsheets. you know, and to get somebody out of an Excel spreadsheet into a new software, or get them out of their current methodology into a new software, is such a challenge. And oftentimes they'll know who their market is, who they're selling it to, but they don't really know who's using it. And that can be a challenge, because the user and the buyer can be different, and the user can be you know, people that have been in that industry or doing that job for years and years and years, that are just really, really set in their ways, and trying to budge that can be really challenging and difficult. So I would say, you know, knowing that, and then understanding who you're selling to, but if it's a B2B, but also understand who the end user is, and the behavior that you're going to have to negotiate to get them to move as well.
I love that phrase, the behavior that you're going to have to negotiate, because not recognizing that entrenched behavior is often a fatal weakness. That's a great comment. Reflections on Stacey's point from the rest of our gang? Yeah, Andy.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I would take it a step further and tie it in with one of mine. And to your point, Gene, especially for med device, it's true for across the board. I mean, changing behavior is non-trivial. And especially with med device, you go and talk to a med device manufacturer, a big, you know, any company that's got a lot of market reach, and they know it's basically sort of a 10-year conversion. If it's something that a doctor is going to put in their hands, it's a 10-year conversion, even if it's a really great idea and it's presented well. You need key opinion leader buy-in, you need a strong, consistent sales force and marketing effort, and eventually you'll get younger docs and older docs to change over. So my tie-in, though, is the dreaded hockey stick. You know, anytime I see a business plan or a teaser where I see conversion rates where, you know, 3% of the market's going to adopt it in year 1 and 7% in year 2, and by year 4 it's at, you know, 31%, and that equals $2.7 billion. You know, all you're really doing as the presenter is leaving behind everyone who's experienced in the space, who realizes that, you know, you shouldn't even think of it in terms of a 3% conversion rate unless you've already talked to some key users who say, yes, you know, if this is really ready in October, I'm going to start buying it. Unless you have good evidence that it will be adopted more quickly, conversion rates are much slower. And it goes to what Stacey was saying and what you mentioned. It's not just med devices, but it's particularly, I think, true in med.
Well, especially in med, where we've got users hidden behind group purchasing organizations and other things like that, where it's not so trivial as just saying, I got some key opinion leaders to say they wanted to buy it, but does their organization agree?
Yeah, and I'll throw one more along that line, and that's that I think a lot of people who are starting have a great idea and may have manifested it into a prototype and may have gotten patents on it and may have, you know, whether it's a diagnostic test or a med device or whatever. What they haven't thought about are the market dynamics that move against them, and not just adoption, but things like reimbursement, right? Things like, to Stacey's point, whatever the current user base is using, moving against that, it can be really, really difficult if the other group has any sort of product, even if it's not as good, but they have a lot of clout and a lot of market reach.
That's good. So I've got no competitors. This is our first, don't say this. The next one is sort of the 3% conversion rate. Like, of course we'll do it. And your answer is, no, not so much. Jim, Niki, what do you think about these? What do you think about these or others? Especially, I'm really interested in this question also of entrenched practice as well. I want to come back to that at some point, but Jim, you were going to say.
Yeah, to tag on to what Andy just mentioned, I've seen it more than once where there perhaps might be a total available market listed in the business plan. And then they say, so let's say the total available market is $10 billion, right? So the assumption, the unsubstantiated assumption then is if we only get 0.25% of the market, look how awesome this business is. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. And I think it's great to have that in the business plan if it's substantiated. Like Andy said, like, do you already have purchase orders? Do you already have billing codes? Do you already have a path forward for commercialization? But oftentimes I've seen, and it's kind of a pet peeve, that it's unsubstantiated and they're just using it as a lever, right? So it's such a huge market that we're going to be successful, because even if we sort of fail and only get 0.01% of the market, we have a successful business. Well, that's not how it works. So.
Let me stop you guys there, because I'm the little entrepreneur inside of me is going, you asked for this information. I don't know how to get this information. I was doing my best. I don't tell me that I'm that I can't make it up. And of course, we've talked elsewhere about ways to try to address that and the need to try to do it. What's a given? Let's take this as a given that the entrepreneur doesn't necessarily have perfect data, that they can't necessarily get it. How would you rather have them both admit that and also do the best that they can to project? Like, what would you rather see than $1 billion market? I'll take 0.25% of it.
For me personally, I'd like to see them do some actual market research. And that's one thing. The other thing is the old classic saying, there's no I in team. It's when we do our due diligence in engaging with a new startup, we look to see if there's a team, number one, because oftentimes it's a one-person show. And in the team, what's the depth and what's the cross-section of disciplines? Because if there is a depth there, oftentimes these things have been addressed a little better, or there's a path forward to address them a little better. Or I know money's tight and there's startups and so forth, but it sure helps to get a third-party expert, analysis done, some research done. There's this term at Keystone called simple Google searches. You can do Google searches all day and that gets you, it's something. But, you're asking people to put forth their hard-earned money. It's best to have something a little more meaty than just, the simple Google searches.
No, that's good stuff.
I'd throw one in there, and we call it spot checking, and we actually do it for usually potential clients if we're curious about it. But sometimes we'll do it just for people we know as well. And granted, at EMA, we've got an advantage that almost no startup has, because we know all the big companies, right? But I think it's true too that an entrepreneur who's starting a company or has a platform, I think you'd be surprised at how willing some of the key, especially the business development people or corporate development people are, how willing they are at big companies to talk to you briefly. They don't want you to come and pitch them about buying your small company, because they get flooded with that stuff. But if you approach them in terms of, I've had this idea, it's a product that would fit in, for EMD, Millipore, Sigma, it would fit in your Sigma group because it does this thing. I'd love to know what you think about it. It's surprising. They will take 10 or 15 minutes once to talk to you about it. They're not going to become your mentor. They're not going to come to your kid's wedding necessarily, but they really will talk with you about it. And spot checking that kind of, asking those questions earlier in the process can head off a lot of pain later, because it can make you change your product. It can make you understand that it's actually reimbursement that's going to be the challenge here, or rollout is going to be incredibly expensive because getting Salesforce up to speed is going to be very difficult for some reason, or something that you haven't thought of.
That's a great point, Andy. I think people often think that's not accessible to me. They would never want to talk to me. And if they did, I would need to sell them on the entire idea and have them say yes to it. But in fact, someone once said that business is a series of yeses. And if the ask is very, very low, I think what people often don't realize is everybody needs new leads. Everybody needs new things to operate on. And if you're inside of a large company and somebody says, hey, can I talk to you about this? And no commitment, it gives you new insights that you can share with your team. So I think that's a real powerful observation.
They're just people, right? They're nice people generally. And, if you approach them at a personal level and say, hey, I just like your opinion about something that I've started to work on, you might be surprised at how willing they are to take a few minutes. Yeah,
that's a great comment. I remember way back in the day when we were at a little company called Handy Lab, and this person by the name of Jan Garfinkel, some of you may know her. She was a consultant. She hadn't yet started her investment firm to the company. And I remember we're all sitting around a room and we needed some strategic intelligence and we didn't know how we were going to get it. And so she picked up the phone and she made a call. And she was just like, right through the front door, I need to know this and this and this about this system. And 5 minutes later, we had the information. And so maybe that's one takeaway here is when you talk about market research, what we're hearing from our group here is don't be afraid to pick up the phone and make the call. The worst you can hear is no. And you're not asking for them to buy your company. You're just asking for a little bit of information. So great. Niki, I want to hear more from you on this and also practice, like entrenched practices. Sometimes the thing we're fighting against isn't always the competitor. It might be the practice. What more can we hear about this?
Sure. Well, I love what everyone has said because it all does really resonate with what I see a lot. I think one way to tie this together is to say lots of times, and not exclusively, but lots of times in the med tech world, you're selling to the end user who is probably a practitioner, probably a physician or some other clinical person. But it also, in my experience at least, I feel that people don't take the time to understand what it is to convince a doc or another clinical person. They say, well, you're going to love it. My pitch will convince you of that because whatever way you're doing right now doesn't work and mine's going to be better. But they don't understand what we do, why we do it. And I've honestly, sitting in some situations, I've been a little dismissed. And I know, Jean, you and I have talked about this, where somebody will say, Niki, you're just a doctor. You don't understand this business stuff. We're talking about how we're going to make med tech here. And I'm like, but you're trying to sell to somebody like me. So my advice would be understand your audience. Where doctors are not here to invest necessarily. If you would like our opinions, you'd like us to like your stuff, know what it is that we expect. We expect clinical data. If you don't have anything in a peer-reviewed journal that you can say, hey, we have proof that this works and it's been published in JAMA or New England Journal or ACS or something like that, you're automatically going to turn us off because that is a really easy way for us to say, yeah, this might work. There's been some work done on this. If you have your own anecdotal bunch from your back lab, that's fine, but you're going to have to work pretty hard to convince a doc that that's a valid study. We've looked at a lot of studies during our science careers, and we usually can tell what a good study is and what isn't. And just sometimes when people say, trust us, you're going to love it, that's a huge turnoff. And I think it kind of touches on what all of you have said. Understand your audience, understand the value of the data that you're presenting, and try to understand the perspective of what it is you're trying to accomplish. If you're looking for investments, talking to a physician or a respiratory therapist or somebody else, that might not be the right thing. If you do want to get key opinion leaders to buy in, you have to make sure that they're going to have a way to do that. If somebody has their own private practice, great, but they probably can't influence a local hospital. If it is a doc in a hospital, you're probably going to have to get through their tech transfer department. It's not always just up to the single physician. So I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts or comments on that, but I feel that docs are customers in a lot of cases. And even though we may not necessarily be as well versed in the vocabulary of business development, the end result is still the same. You have to convince us that what you have is really going to work and that it's worth listening to. And I think, as Andy, as you said, sometimes we're happy to offer the opinion. That I know that's what my group does. If you're not asking for anything, it's just, what do you think from your experience? And most docs are really happy to do that. So again, as Andy said, and Jean, as you had echoed, sometimes you just want to see what docs like and be open to it rather than say, you're going to love it, because I get that all the time.
I think it's a really interesting point, Niki, because we will often in our practice, we'll have people come to us with their startup and they'll say, especially if they're academic, and they'll say, I already know what clinical trial I want to do. And they're basing it on the basis of their intellectual interest in it, what they think could be publishable. Then we have to often tell them, FDA doesn't necessarily need clinical data from you to get this on the market. So hold up, let's see if they do. And if they do, it's not going to be what you had in your head for your intellectual academic thing. But you're bringing a third point to this, which is kind of the startups will come in and they'll say, oh, we can generate clinical data. And one message is, hold up, you may not need it. And if you do, it's what FDA wants, not what you may think it is. But then even if they don't technically need it, you're also saying, wait, hold on. One of the main things that a clinician actually wants to see, it's not necessarily random academic data, and it's not necessarily what FDA wanted to see. It's what's going to convince them in ways that they're familiar with being convinced about that
Yeah.
this device works and does what they want. So I think it's a really interesting point.
The first question myself and my fellow physicians always ask is, do you have any published data in a peer-reviewed journal to say that this works? Especially if it's something that's a little out of our league. I am not an oncologist. I am not a genetics expert. I know some stuff, but unless you show me a paper or data that I can say, oh, I see your technology works, I may struggle.
While we're on this, the question came in, we sell to the doctors, but they don't make the purchases. How to sell to the administrators? Ooh, anyone want to, I think we've gone around the table once here, so let's pause there and let that question that Lynn sent in come in. How do we sell to the administrators?
I have a little experience with this, and it's not an easy answer. I will say that, yes, you do need to have a physician champion within most systems, and that's just flat out. I mean, you got to find some doc, preferably more than one doc, who's willing to go to the mat and who knows the right people. Going to a department head who maybe has some research money and some residents to kind of help, maybe you do a pilot at their site, that helps. If you're talking to somebody who runs like a country clinic, that person probably isn't going to be the right key opinion leader to help force that forward. Also, healthcare administrators are going to say, can this get paid for? So if you have not come up with a CPT reimbursement strategy, and I know we've talked about that on the show in the past, your payers aren't going to be able to reimburse you for it. Even if you do have a CPT code, you don't know how much it's going to reimburse for. I see a lot of startups who haven't even given any thought to this. I talked to one not too long ago who said, well, we expect to get a CPT code assigned within the year, and this will be all fine. And I said, wow, that's a hard process to do. That is not easy. Even if you get that, you don't know what the actual payer reimbursement is going to be. If you can show a healthcare system that, yeah, they'll be able to bill for it, that's going to go a long way in helping to convince a healthcare administrator that this is viable. So it's not just physician key opinion leaders. You want to get the payer side involved. You want to make sure you understand your government regulatory and reimbursement side of it.
So it's really interesting, Niki, because kind of what I'm hearing the answer is that it's, in some sense, the doctors do make part of the decision, but the hospital system makes part of the decision. And it means you've got multiple people who have to be convinced.
Yeah.
And so if you can get the docs saying this is what we want, then the question is, who's the key opinion leader who can convince? Do others have experience with this question of how do we convince the administrators? Have you encountered that in your work?
Yeah, mine's a really simple answer, and it's sort of pessimistic, and I don't know, you guys might disagree, but we usually tell people that you aren't going to sell to hospital systems. As a single product company, you just are really going to have a hard time. That doesn't mean that if you can get a study started at Beaumont or Northwestern Hospital or something, and you have some docs involved, that hospital won't adopt it for a period of time. But it's going to be extremely difficult to build a business around you setting up an infrastructure to go and sell to hospital systems. It's just, even with a CPT code, it's very, very challenging. So, I mean, that's what all the giant guys, the big guys, they are sales and marketing infrastructures. They've organized themselves around the idea that breaking down those barriers is what they do day in and day out. And they spend billions of dollars a year to do it. I just think it's incredibly challenging for a small company to expect to fully commercialize and implement, on a commercial level, their product set. And I may be too much of a pessimist, so
no, that's 100% true. Plus, a lot of these products, unless they're brand new technology, are under contract. So you've got to deal with that. It's not just kick the door in at the hospital and make a good sales pitch. The hospital folks are constrained themselves. So even if they love your idea, oftentimes they've got to be cognizant of their contract agreements that they have with the big players. So the number of call points, if there's a startup that has a business plan that says we're going to put boots on the street and we're going to go knock down the doors in the hospitals, I don't give it a very high chance of success because of what it's really, really difficult.
So be ready that it's going to take those big guns to get through those doors. And yet it's this interesting catch-22, because we've seen over and over that a business that doesn't sort of start in that direction and be willing to find a way in they almost get dismissed because they're not trying hard enough. Niki had her finger up there.
Yeah, actually, I think, and some people may disagree with me on this, but what I have seen is you have to understand what healthcare systems are good for.
Mm.
Healthcare systems are not really there to develop business. They're there to take care of patients. So what can you really expect to get out of a healthcare system? You can expect to get access to patients and data. If you're expecting them to help you build your company, that might not be the right partner, as Andy was saying. You're looking for a J&J, you're looking for a Bard, you're looking for Medtronic. A healthcare system is going to help you do your clinical trials. It's going to help you partner with the university. It's going to help you with your pilot studies. It's going to help you with data. It's not really there to help you become a successful company, if that makes sense. I don't know what the group's thought is on that, but I've had multiple conversations with people about this, and healthcare systems, a lot of them do feel that they are entrepreneurial and are excellent at business development, and some are pretty good. But ultimately, I don't see any healthcare companies, or excuse me, healthcare systems owning a healthcare company like a J&J.
Mm. Yeah, thoughts around the table?
Agree.
Completely agree.
Completely
Mhm.
agree.
That's good. Well, I think we've been around the table once, and then a great question there from Lynn. Let's do another quick pass around the table here. We're going to try to get a few more of these in. The turnoffs, and I think we started with Stacey. We'll come back to Stacey here for the next turnoff. And what's the next thing on your list, Stacey?
Well, I would go with the financial models.
Okay.
Far, I'm going to dive into this, and this is not my area of expertise, but I am going to dive into this because far too often, and again, I'm speaking from the perspective of very early stage companies who perhaps, are seeking that first money in, and, with the understanding that maybe they haven't sat down with a finance expert, with an accountant to really truly understand, still maybe have some market development to do. So the financial models to me are nothing more than a crazy 8-ball. I mean, you're just shaking it to see what it says, because in the early stage funding, there's a lot of information that probably isn't there yet. And I'm probably going to be kicked out of the room for saying it. I almost don't want to see them, because even like Jim said earlier, you get this big bubble. You always have the slide with the pie chart, always. I can get this percentage of the market, which is this much money. In year 3, I'm going to be here. And, year 5, I'm going to be solvent and a billionaire. And it's truly just shaking up the 8-ball to see what lands. And I just don't like it. I think it's a waste of time when you don't have all the factors to put into it. So I'll throw that out there. And if you kick me out of the room, that's fine.
I don't think you're going to get kicked out. I think it's sort of similar to what Andy was saying about the hockey stick 3% conversion rate thing before,
Right.
Not acknowledging that. I mean, I think the group would probably agree that it's nothing wrong with saying that we're working in a market that has this general size, to give me some context as to the size of the market that I'm working with. But it's these claims of we're going to take this much by this date that don't seem to really hold a lot of water.
Their break even, how much is it going to cost to bring this to market? I mean, there's just so many factors there that at the early stage maybe aren't as well known as they should. So later stage, obviously, when you're looking to do $1 million seed round, you better know, your market, you better know your financial model. But at that very early stage, it's a challenge.
I would throw one thing in there though, and we tell clients this all the time, no matter how early it is, you stop at gross margin, because one of the criteria for not only your own success, if you do stand the company up and try and get to break even by generating cash flow, but for any outside observer, whether it's an investor and in particular a strategic entity, they want to know what the gross margin is. And they understand that if Into Being is doing your prototype work and your early low production work, it's going to cost roughly $1.2 billion per unit to make it, right? I mean, it's just incredibly expensive to get the first 10 units made.
Especially with Gene, yeah.
But the question is what happens downstream, and you need to go talk to some manufacturers, or you need to get some advice from, the Into Being folks can guide you on this. Where do your margins end up? Because if you're not at the sort of minimum required margins for that kind of sector, you're not going to get any traction out there, no matter how good your idea is. you're just not going to be able to pull it through. So, we tell people, understand your margins right from the outset, or at least start doing projections and have that in your sights right from the get-go.
Got a comment here from our friend Jeff Reinfeldt. Look at expenses more than the revenue. If they don't understand expenses, they don't understand the market. Also, they're all profitable in 3 years. Smiley face. So, great comment, Jeff. Other turnoffs. Let's go around the table. Let's hear, and we'll do a little bit of rapid fire here in the time we have remaining. Next big turnoff, so we can make sure to end up with a list here for anyone who's listening to this, and they're going to come to our pitch party, and they're wondering what they shouldn't put in. Andy's holding something up here.
Holding.
Oh, let's see. It's sort of fuzzy.
Oh, it looks like a squirrel with a
The
nut.
squirrel.
Squirrel.
Squirrel. We call it the
It
squirrel
is fuzzy.
trap. It's called, we say, oh, look, a squirrel, right? You get these small groups that are chasing off into the woods, chasing every squirrel they see, and their platform is going to solve all the problems in the world. It's going to cure cancer and diabetes, right? Because it's a new nanostructure that has actives on it or something, whatever. So I'll boil it down. For us, what we really like to see is that you've thought up a really great idea that might be a better mousetrap, but that you say it's going to go and do this one thing, and here's how we can approach that specific challenge and solve that particular problem. We see lots and lots of blanket, universal, fix the universe kinds of things, and that's great, but you really do need to solve a problem for a user group at a certain price and profit.
Focus.
Focus. Other thoughts, other turnoffs. We're going to go rapid fire here.
Hey, Gene, real quick.
Yep.
Just one thing that I'll say, and it's not really about the pitch, but more of the presentation.
Yes.
Please do not overload your slides. I cannot handle too much information on one slide because I'm not listening to you, I'm reading. So
it's a real basic point, but a really important one. Not 5 points, not 7 points. Yeah, 3 lines.
Yeah.
Don't oversell.
I'm going to tag on to what Stacey just said, and it drives me crazy when a presenter is talking and talking and talking. Just like the slides run on, sometimes they talk so much, try to explain the science or explain their financial projections or whatever, that you can't get a question in edgewise. And usually pitches are limited. Maybe you have 10, 15 minutes. And really, I want to ask questions that are coming up. I don't necessarily want them to tell me something I don't know or don't care to know.
Mm-hmm.
Great point.
Goes back to knowing your audience.
Okay, we got time for about 2 more, and then we have a couple of questions coming in here in the chat, and we will open it up at the end. If anyone has any questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to. We're going to touch on Kevin's comment and Wakar's question here in just a second, but let's hear at least 2 more here. 2 more turnoffs.
So building on the market discussion we had earlier, I had sort of a general category called self-assessed critical information, which has some sub-bullets. So, and I promise I am not a paid, promoter here. Gene has not compensated me in any way, but I will tell you that it is a pet peeve of mine when we ask what class device is this, and they say, well, we believe it's class 1. Well, that's neat that you believe that, but we require, before we engage with a client, we require a third party hardcore regulatory assessment because the entire business plan is affected by that, right? If it's class 1, class 2, PMA, de novo, that type of thing. So that's one of the sub bullets for, there's often not a strong, background there. Voice of customer, we often diplomatically say, no offense, entrepreneur, but you're the last person we're going to ask if your idea is cool or not, right? You really have to have a solid voice of customer sort of background there in the business plan, because that helps define the product, it helps define the need. And at times the IP landscape as well. All these other things can be great, but if there are some big behemoths in there that are very litigious, or it's a crowded minefield, that presents even more challenges for the thing. So oftentimes I see that being a little bit weak as well.
That's
or
great.
Self-assessed,
Those are great. I think we could have spent 2 hours on this topic. You guys are great and so much good stuff. We have a few questions here. I know some both listeners and our friend Andy have a hard stop at 3. So when that time comes, you'll all be dropping off, and that'll be just fine. We're going to try to address a few of these questions that our audience has asked. This one from Lynn: do you recommend ending a pitch early and opening the floor for questions? We'll take one answer to that. Andy's shaking his head yes.
Yes.
Stop the pitch early and open the floor for questions.
Keep it
Because if I'm-
simple, give your message and give time. Yeah, absolutely. Give time for questions.
That's great. We're going to go over to this one. Just a comment from Kevin. Though I enjoy working with startups, a big turnoff is finding out they invested in a water feature for their offices. So if you have the water feature, don't put it in your pitch. And this last question that we'll end with today: what do you guys make about the hype around telemedicine? Is this going to continue to grow post-pandemic? Anyone who's got to leave, we understand totally. You got 20 seconds left till the 3 o'clock, but we'll just take a few comments on this. What do you make of telemedicine?
Yes.
I think
I
it's
was-
gonna
I was
continue.
in the Michigan Health Policy Conference yesterday, and yes, telemedicine is staying. However,
Okay.
I don't think they're looking for a whole lot of solutions. I think people have kind of found what's working for them. It's playing nice with whatever system, you know, if they're using Epic or what, everything's playing nice together. So I don't think we need a whole lot of new innovative techniques in telehealth, but it is here to stay. I believe that.
Yeah.
We're having our first telemedicine appointment, I think, next week for something related to our sons. So I could see that being the case. Niki, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I completely agree. It's not going anywhere. And I think although reimbursement for telemedicine has not traditionally been great, I suspect in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see that expand. So you'll probably see more telemedicine. And I know we've chatted in the past about the need for doing physical exam and other assessments remotely. That could be a med tech area. But I think until, and again, it has to be cost effective for your patient population. But I think, as Stacey said, a lot of these places already have encrypted video portals. That's not the answer. We have that. It's all the infrastructure around that encrypted video portal that's going to make the difference.
Make the difference. That's great. Well, I can't tell you guys how much I appreciate your being with us today. Each one of you in the audience and our judges. The pitch party starts next week. We're going to start hearing from our companies. And at the end of June, Niki and Jim and Stacey and Andy will be back with us to comment for a whole session on each of the pitches that they've heard. And we will have fun reviewing those together. So thank you each for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
You.
That's the end of this episode of MedTech Crossroads. We'll see you next week. Have a great weekend. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.